Muted.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jared Lucas, and I serve as the Director of the Loans Office here at the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development. I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for this small business web series entitled Financing a Small Business. Also like to welcome you to the Pennsylvania Small Business Week. The Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, known as DCED, and our partners are celebrating PA Small Business Week during National Small Business Week, which is being held this week, the first week of May. We want to celebrate the contributions of our small businesses and entrepreneurs and highlight the resources available to support your needs. Partners around the state are available to help. You as a small business can learn more about available resources on DCED's website. The website is newpa.com/prep. That's PREP. So as part of Small Business Week, this week DCED, in collaboration with our partners, we're hosting a Lunch and Learn webinar series. And the webinar series is going on all this week from noon to 1 p.m. Feel free to check out our other events and resources on newpa.com/PA-small-biz. You can also stay up to date on the latest small business news by subscribing to our newsletter. Additionally, on social media, you can follow the conversation using hashtag PASmallBiz16. Before we start, I just have a couple of housekeeping items to go over. Today's presentation will be recorded and posted on our website and social media channels. We will have a question and answer session during the last 10 minutes. You can submit your questions using the questions box, and our moderator will read them at the end of the presentation. So I am pleased to turn over the webinar to today's presenter, John Reichard. John serves as a Program Director of Finance at CETA Council of Governments. John's organization is a nonprofit economic development organization that partners closely with DCED to administer our business loan financing programs, among a variety of other things they partner with DCED on. CETA serves an 11-county region in the central and north central part of the state. So with that said, I'm pleased to turn over today's webinar to John Reichard.
Good afternoon, everyone. We should have the presentation here come up on the screen here soon.
John, you should be able to click to the next slide.
I do not seem to have control.
All right, we're trying again.
There we go. All right. As Jared mentioned, I'm the Director of Business Finance Department at the CETA Council of Governments. We're located in Lewisburg, Union County, again covering an 11-county area in central Pennsylvania. Our agency is involved in various economic development activities on behalf of small businesses and the communities that we serve in our area. We also have a related entity, CETA Local Development Corporation, which is a certified development corporation and works with the U.S. Small Business Administration to provide their economic development loan program, which is the SBA 504 program, to small businesses across the entire state of Pennsylvania. I personally have 21 years of experience working with public sector financing programs at CETA. And to give you a background of the impact that we've had in our area and across the state, since 1981, we have provided 915 small business loans worth over $225 million to Pennsylvania businesses. go over an overview here of some of the information that I'll be presenting today. I'll go over the role of public sector financing programs, some of the sources of public sector financing programs, some of the eligibility requirements, and some of the overview of public sector financing programs, including revolving loan funds, loans through the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, DCED, the U.S. Small Business Administration, and also touch upon some non-bank lenders that are in the marketplace. Finally, I will talk briefly about what startups need to secure public sector financing, and then we'll open it up to some questions. The main role of public sector financing is to fill the gap, which is it covers a portion of the financing need that a bank may not be willing to provide through conventional financing. It also reduces the bank's risk. They are involved in the project in a lesser amount. Therefore, their risk in the deal is mitigated by a public sector loan being part of the financing mix. And it could also provide them an incentive to lend to a startup. Public sector financing typically provides a full-term fixed interest rate, which is very beneficial to small businesses because it reduces the risk of interest rate increases over the life of the loan, and most of them have no balloon payments. You sometimes find that with conventional financing, it'll be a shorter term fixed interest rate, and the term may not match the amortization schedule, resulting in a balloon needing to renegotiate or refinance that loan down the road. It also reduces the amount of money the owners need to provide versus traditional bank financing. Typically, traditional bank financing would require 20 to 25% down by the borrower. In some cases, using public sector financing as part of the mix, we can get that as low as 10%. The public sector financing loans, again, typically provide between 40 and 50% of what the borrower needs, with the remainder split up between conventional bank financing and borrower contribution. One thing I do want to point out is public sector financing is not a lender of last resort. The vast majority of times when we're involved in a project, there is a bank involved in the project as well. If there are cases where a borrower, for whatever reason, cannot secure bank financing, even in part, chances are there's something about that credit or project or need that may not work for banks. We cannot do everything that the borrower needs, so there has to be some interest by a bank in a project. Some of the sources of public sector financing, local revolving loan funds. I'll talk a little bit about what we have at CETA, but there are a multitude of economic development agencies across the state, and a lot of them have access to these loan programs. Some do, some don't. So I'll tie everything with CETA, but also try to let everyone know what else may be available in other parts of the state. We have, and I know some others, have a revolving loan fund that was initially funded through the Appalachian Regional Commission, or ARC. I know a lot have revolving loan funds originally sourced through the Economic Development Administration. There are also some in the state who received funding to start a revolving loan fund from the U.S. Department of Agriculture. And there are unique economic development groups out in the state that are CDFI lenders. They received some of their funding through the U.S. Treasury Community Development Financial Institutions Fund to start their revolving loan funds. The next level then are funding sources through the state of Pennsylvania, primarily the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, DCED. And on the last level is on the federal side, which is through the U.S. Small Business Administration. There are two programs that the SBA has, the SBA 504 program, which is provided directly through certified development corporations across the state. I believe there were about 13 or 14 that cover different areas of the state. And then they also provide a guarantee program to banks in the state. These programs are both national programs as well. Eligibility. Again, I'm going to talk in generalities. A lot of the different loan programs that you will find out there, each of them have their own set of guidelines, eligibility. So one set of eligibility requirements may not match every single loan, but these are some of the most common. Primarily for-profit enterprises that are involved in manufacturing, agricultural production. There are some out there for some service and retail and tourism enterprises. And most of them require, if real estate is involved in the project, that the borrower has to occupy a majority of the space. That's to get away from an investment type project where a small business owner basically just owns property and leases all of it out to other individuals or businesses. Primarily, these loans are used to purchase fixed assets. Production equipment, land and building purchase can get involved sometimes in renovation or expansion of a building, and may also include furniture, fixtures, and equipment. Some of the public sector loans are able to provide working capital. Some of them may require fixed assets to support that working capital loan. And in some cases, there are some lines of credit that are available through public sector financing as well. Some of the things that public sector financing may not be able to do, provide financing for franchise fees, for rolling stock, vehicles, anything that is titled for over-the-road travel, liquor licenses, goodwill, which is typically found when an individual or a group purchases an existing business. Use is sometimes difficult to finance. Again, it's a case-by-case basis. Leasehold improvements. These are sometimes able to be financed, although the improvements are being done to a property not owned by the borrower, so a mortgage is typically not available. So there would most likely need to be other collateral available to support that financing. Lines of credit. There are a couple loan programs out there that are able to provide lines of credit. It's fairly new to public sector financing. That's traditionally a bank product, but it may be out there. Another difficulty sometimes is refinancing existing debt for existing businesses. There's been some movement with the Small Business Administration loan programs, as I'll touch upon later. And then potentially you may find a revolving loan fund that would allow some refinancing of existing debt. Most require fixed assets being financed as collateral to support the loan. And these public sector loan programs are typically subordinate in position to the bank loan in the project. Most of them require personal guarantees of all 20% or more owners of the business. In some cases, this is an absolute. Other cases, there may be some flexibility. It all depends on the loan program. As I mentioned earlier, these public sector loan programs typically offer a lower borrower cash injection than traditional bank financing. Typically 15 to 20% for startups, depending on the nature of the project. Typically 10% for existing businesses, which the guideline, for the most part, is those businesses that have been in business for at least 2 years. Cash injection in some cases can be borrowed. Most small businesses don't have a lot of cash on hand. The owners may have it in equity in their home. They are allowed to borrow that through a bank loan and then inject that cash into the project. In some cases, depending on the project and the loan program, it may be possible to leverage equity in the existing project real estate, say for a building expansion or in addition to a building, that type of thing. If you already own the land and wish now to build a building, that may also be another example. So let's look at some of the specific loan programs and some of the details of them. For revolving loan funds, eligibility requirements are typically set by the lender, and there's usually a broad level or set of guidelines that the agency has to work within, but there may be some flexibility as to where they want to focus the loans, whether it's to service and retail or just to manufacturers, maximum loan amounts, interest rates, and so on. Most of the ones that are out there have loan limits of about $100,000 or $200,000. We have a couple of our revolving loan funds that can go up to $250,000. Some of them allow lending to service, retail, and tourism establishments. Others may be devoted strictly to manufacturers. Minimum loan size, again, usually around the $15,000 to $20,000 range. We're willing at CETA to potentially look at a smaller loan if it makes sense. Loan fees typically for these revolving loan funds are small, maybe 1%, maybe 2%. In some cases I've seen agencies out there that are currently waiving some of their fees. So it all depends on where you access these revolving loan funds from. Most do require job creation tied to loan amount. In some cases, job retention would also qualify for existing businesses. And most of them have fixed interest rate for the life of the loan. And again, most of them do require personal guarantees of 20% or more owners of the small business. Now we'll look at some of the information for the Pennsylvania Department of Community and Economic Development, DCED's loan programs. They have a few. There are also some more, but the ones I'm going to be looking at here are the Pennsylvania Industrial Development Authority, or PIDA. There's also First Industries, and they have 2 offshoots of the First Industries, one for agriculture and one for tourism-related businesses. And finally, there's the Pennsylvania Minority Business Development Authority, or PMBDA. There are other programs that can be found at www.newpa.com/program. Looking more at the DCED program for PIDA, eligible types of businesses are manufacturing, industrial, agricultural enterprises, both processors and producers, research and development enterprises, hospitality enterprises. Now in this case, it's for existing hospitality enterprises. I believe the criteria now is that it has to be in business for at least 5 years. Defense conversion enterprises, recycling, construction, daycare. They can look at some nonprofit daycare enterprises. Service and retail, Keystone Opportunity Zone based enterprises, if they're located inside a Keystone Innovation Zone, I'm sorry. Computer-related service enterprises, and pollution prevention and energy efficiency. All right, sorry about that. Some more information about the PETA loan program. It can finance up to 50% financing of eligible project costs. There are certain maximum loan amounts depending on the nature of the business and what the loan is for. Some agricultural producers, manufacturers, industrial enterprises. For land and building, it can be up to $2 million, $400,000 maximum for equipment costs. For hospitality, defense conversion, recycling, computer-related services, and so on, maximum $400,000 for land and building costs, and also $400,000 for equipment. If a small business is involved with service and retail, the maximum loan size there is $200,000 for land and building as well as equipment. PETA does have a working capital line of credit available, and that is capped at $100,000. And for projects involving pollution prevention and energy efficiency, that is capped at $100,000. Interest rates, that is set quarterly by DCED. The current rate is 3.25%, and that rate is fixed for the life of the loan. The term of the loans, for real estate, it can be up to 15 years, 10 years for equipment, 1 year with a maximum renewal of up to 6 years for working capital lines of credit. If there's a project that is mixed use, in other words, there's need for land and building costs as well as equipment, DCED will look at a blended term based on the amount in the project for the certain assets. The other requirement is that the term of the PETA loan cannot exceed the private sector financing, the bank loan, involved in the project. Job creation requirements based on the loan amount. In some cases, job retention can also be part of the project as well. Some exceptions are for agriculture. There may not be any requirement for job creation or retention, depending on the nature of the ag business. And these loans are applied for through certified economic development organizations, of which CETA is one in our 11-county region, but there are a multitude of certified economic development organizations across the state. Now let's take a look at the First Industries loan programs. The first one is for agriculture. This can include production agriculture, food processing, wholesale farm commodities, urban and rural supermarkets, farmers markets, as well as energy-related activities impacting production agriculture or food processing. The tourism side for First Industries can include businesses that are a destination site, including historic, heritage, cultural, sporting, amusement, outdoor recreational, retail venues. Also can be included are hospitality establishments, lodging, restaurants, retail, outdoor activity-based businesses that are in close geographic proximity to a destination site. This can include startup, lodging, and restaurants. And finally, tourism-related activities or events that promote overnight visits in Pennsylvania. There's a business that attracts people, say, from other states into Pennsylvania that would typically require an overnight visit, that may qualify for a tourism loan. The guidelines for First Industries very similar to PETA. Maximum loan amounts, $400,000. In the case of equipment, there may be an opportunity to get up to $500,000, depending on how much funds are available in the account. Up to 50% financing of eligible project costs. Job creation, again, requirements based on loan amount. Some exceptions for agriculture. Again, some may also include job retention. And these loans are also applied through certified economic development organizations. The last DCED loan program is the Pennsylvania Minority Business Development Authority. These are businesses owned and operated by ethnic minorities. The interest rate is set by DCED. I do apologize. I'm not sure exactly what that current rate is. It may be the 3.25%. Term of the loans, up to 10 years for land and building, up to 7 years for equipment, 3 years for working capital, and again, a blended term if there's a mixed use in the project. Maximum loan amount, up to 75% of eligible project costs, up to a maximum of $250,000. If that business is located within an enterprise zone, that may go up to $350,000. Then there's higher loan amounts for industrial enterprises, manufacturers, advanced technology. Maximum there is $500,000, potentially up to $750,000. These loans are applied directly through DCED and their loan approval process. The last set of loans that I would like to talk to you about is the SBA 504 loan through the U.S. Small Business Administration. This loan program deals with for-profit businesses. They can be involved with manufacturing, agriculture, service, retail, and even franchises. It can look at startups as well as existing businesses. The percent that the loan program can provide in a project is based on the nature of the business and the property that the business is located if the project involves the financing of those assets. 40% for existing businesses, up to 35% if the company is a startup or the property is special purpose in nature. One clear example is a hotel. And maximum 30% participation if the business is a startup and they are located in a special purpose property. The terms, there are two separate terms, 10 years for equipment, 20 years for real estate. If a project does have mixed use assets, then typically the loan would be for the term that has the highest split in terms of the money for either one of the uses. Loan amounts on the 504 program, minimum loan is $50,000. Maximum loan amount is $5 million. In some cases, that can be as high as $5.5 million. The loan can be used for land and building purchase, building construction, renovation, expansion, equipment, some soft costs, appraisals, environmentals, other closing costs that may be involved. And in some cases, we can refinance existing real estate and or equipment. Some of the things that the 504 loan cannot finance is rolling stock, goodwill, liquor licenses, franchise fees, working capital. The interest rate is based on the sale of bonds to investors on a monthly basis. The final rate that the small business owner gets is fixed for the life of the loan once the bond that includes their loan is sold. The current effective rate for a 10-year loan is 4.33%, and for 20-year it's 4.31%. These 504 loans are applied for through certified development corporations throughout the state, again, of which CETA is one. Non-bank lenders. There are non-bank lenders out in the state that typically have a niche market that they go after to assist small businesses, and they look to further fill the gap between bank financing and sometimes public sector financing in a project. Typically, these non-bank lenders qualify as micro lenders. Loan amounts anywhere between $2,500 to $25,000. Sometimes smaller loans than, say, CETA can get involved in. Those loans may have a higher interest rate versus public sector financing, but it may be cheaper than financing a small amount on a business credit card. Sometimes they have broader use of funds for financing. Sometimes also require little or no collateral to support the loan. And many of these microlenders use the U.S. Small Business Administration's 7A guarantee program to back the loans. Some other non-bank lenders out there, Ben Franklin Technology Partners. They get involved with early-stage technology companies, as well as established manufacturers that are implementing technological innovation to what they currently do. They cannot assist retail establishments at this time, and their investment into a project typically ranges from $25,000 to $150,000 per year, and based on the nature of the project and need, that investment can be up to a 3-year period. Another non-bank lender I mentioned in the beginning as from the source of funds are community development financial institutions, or CDFIs. And again, depending on the CDFI, they may focus on one particular assistance area than another, but in general, they typically assist startups or early stage businesses. Most of them have loans up to $50,000. There may be some out there that can finance a little bit more. Some of them offer SBA 7A guaranteed loans to back the loans that they provide. And some of them go beyond just small business assistance and also support community development and or affordable housing projects in their area. One of the last areas that I have to discuss here is what startups need to secure public sector financing. I'm not sure how many in the audience are startup businesses in nature, but it's very important to have the proper information when speaking to either a bank or a public sector financing agency like CETA. The first main one is to have a written business plan. And there are small business development centers across the state that can assist individuals that are looking to start a business and to help them put together a formalized business plan. Some of the things in that business plan are, what is the need for the product or service that their business is going to be involved in? What's the competition? Are there certain barriers to entry by existing businesses in that marketplace? What are the startup's prospective customers? Have they reached out and received any letters of interest or intent for their product or service? And probably most importantly from a lending standpoint is how much capital or financing is required for the startup enterprise. One large decision to be made is if this business needs to be located in a building, does it make sense to lease a building, or does it make sense to buy? Buy obviously requires more financing than leasing. Is there also a need for working capital or a line of credit, and for how long, in order to get the startup to where it can produce its own cash flow? Cash investment into the business, again, this is very important need for startups that may not have a lot of money to put into their startup endeavor. The amount is lower when public sector financing is involved. And again, some cases can use equity and personal residence to get cash out, which would be a separate loan through a bank, home equity line of credit, second mortgage, that type of thing. Another potential requirement may mean that you need to find an investor for your business that has some money to be able to be put in to the startup. Looks like I'm a little bit ahead of time here with my information. At this point, I'd be happy to open it up to any questions that you have about public sector financing.
So just a reminder for those on the line, you are on mute, so if you have questions, please enter them into the question box. We do have a question already regarding whether the slides will be shared following this presentation. The presentation has been recorded and will be available on YouTube as well as on our channels and our website. So a couple of different ways to be able to share and watch this video. So some questions that we do have include, so just here's one for you, John. Can you elaborate on the timing involved in getting these different kinds of loans approved?
Yes, that's a very good question, and there are a lot of factors in determining how long it may get to get a public sector loan approved for a project. Revolving loan funds typically are the fastest to get approved because they are done in-house through the public sector agency. Typically it would involve putting a loan request together to a loan committee or board of directors, and that's the final approval. The state of Pennsylvania, Small Business Administration, other sources of financing require an application to be put together once local approval has been achieved, and that adds a little bit more to the timeline. The main timing issue for this is a lot on the borrower as well as the nature of the project. Depending on how long it takes that small business owner to get the information that, say, I would require to put my credit memo together will determine in a large part how long it takes to get the loan approved. The application process as well to the final funding source, and then that final funding source's review time. To give you an idea, we have had turnaround times from receiving all the information that we needed from the small business to getting an internal loan approved, one of our revolving loan funds, can happen within 2, maybe 3 weeks. We've had turnaround times for approval for, say, state and SBA loans in that 30, 45-day period. At the same time, we have also had projects that, for various reasons, delays in getting final cost estimates, maybe the need to have an appraisal done prior to submission of an application. Various things like that could mean that the approval process could take a few months. It all depends on a case-by-case basis. I would, personally, I would love nothing more than to be able to get an approval for a small business within that 30, 45-day time frame. Some cases it can be done. Other cases it may take a little bit longer. So closing is also a separate matter. Most of these public sector financing loans are called takeout financing. In other words, the bank involved in the project would provide a bridge loan to cover the public sector loan during construction or in order to purchase the equipment, say. And then once that equipment is in place, when the building construction is done or when the building purchase has taken place, then these loans can close, and then the money from those loans pay off the temporary bridge loan through the bank.
So a follow-on question to that question is, once loan monies are received, what kind of reporting is required in terms of financial reports or progress reports on how the funding is being utilized? Are you able to elaborate on that?
Yes. For the most part, the information that we require from borrowers on an annual basis is the same information that you would need to send to your bank for their loan. We would need annual tax returns for the business, annual personal tax returns for the owners, especially those that we have personal guarantees securing the loan. We would need to make sure that all the insurances that are required, we get annual renewal certificates for. The only thing that right now that I can think of that may differ, as I mentioned earlier, most of these loan programs require some sort of job creation or retention aspect to them. So we are required to reach out to these small businesses on an annual basis to update us on the number of employees that they have. This is done typically through a PA UC2, which is the unemployment compensation form that businesses need to file on a quarterly basis. At CETA, we collect the fourth quarter UC2 form from businesses, and that way we keep track of job creation or retention over the life of the loan. Other than that, again, it is fairly standard information that you would need to provide to the bank for their loan.
Okay, another question we have is, if someone is looking to start a food business, which one of these programs should they look at first?
Well, it would depend on the nature of the food business. And the reason why I bring this up is we have a source of leads from the SBA if small businesses or entrepreneurs are looking to find potential financing out there. They can fill out a form and we get a little bit of a contact lead. I've actually seen a lot of individuals looking to start like food trucks. I guess in certain parts of the states and cities, it's very popular to have food service trucks for, say, lunches and so on. Those types of projects typically need some initial startup working capital to buy inventory and typically involve a vehicle. And as I mentioned in my presentation here, unless you can find maybe a local revolving loan fund through an economic development agency, in my experience, most of them cannot finance vehicles. Startup inventory working capital, again, maybe one of the revolving loan funds, unless it's a really large need. In those types of businesses, I think a micro lender or maybe a CDFI lender may be best. If from a food business we are talking about a restaurant, it would depend on a startup restaurant or whether someone is acquiring an existing restaurant. From CETA standpoint, we have used the SBA 504 program for restaurants, and I believe we have a few restaurants under the PETA program, and those were non-startups. Those were restaurants that had been in business for at least 5 years, and I believe also had at least 5 full-time employees. We have made some loans through that program for those interested in buying an existing restaurant. So I hope that answers that individual's question.
Thanks, John. I'll just keep reading the questions as they come in.
Sure.
We have another question here. For the letters of interest within the business plan, would a document similar to a petition, a document written by the owner and signed by interested customers, work for this? If not, what sort of document is preferred? Right.
Good question. I would think if the nature of the business is more on the service or retail side, obviously you're not going to get a letter of intent of another business that would be a customer necessarily of that retail establishment. So in those cases, yes, if there's a petition of people in the local community saying, boy, you know, we really need this type of retail space or type of business or this type of service in our area, those petitions, in theory, could lend credence to the potential success of that business. When I was mentioning letters of interest or letters of intent, that's typically found through manufacturers. So if I'm going to be producing, if I want to produce a widget, and I know that there's a company nearby that needs widgets for the product that they make, and if I can get a letter of interest to say, hey, if you open up your doors and you can make a quality widget, I would be interested in buying those widgets from you. It could be a very general statement to that effect, or it could be, hey, you know what? If you start up, I have such a need that I'm willing to buy 1,000 widgets a month through your business. And that could also work on, depending on the service nature of the business, it may lend to more of that letter of intent from another business. But that initial question there, yeah, a petition of sorts could be used to show support for that startup.
Great. And I don't know if there are any other questions, but we do have one final question. So for someone wanting to explore these various financing options, who do they talk to first? And would you recommend that they speak to one of these service providers or their bank first?
Mm-hmm. Very good question. From CETA standpoint, we've found that a vast majority of the potential projects that we're introduced to come from our banking relationships and partners in our area and across the state. I think it's more common for a existing business or maybe a startup to, their first inclination is to talk to a bank. And so I think that's why we get the majority of our projects through banks calling us after meeting with that small business owner or entrepreneur. But there are some that find our information either through state's website, our website, SBA, you name it, and they reach out to us directly. Either way, we can provide that small business information, guidance on maybe what loan program may be able to assist them. In some cases, it's best to have us involved or reach out to us as early in the process as possible. I have received calls in the past, and I hate when I get these types of calls. A business will, or an individual will call me and say, hey, I'm getting ready to, I have a sales agreement on a property. I've talked to my bank. They've approved the loan, but I'm wondering if there's anything you can help me with. And by the way, closing is next week. Obviously, we went over a question of timing. How long do these loans take to get approved? And unfortunately, we can't get things done sometimes as quick as some banks can. So the earlier you can reach out to a public sector loan provider such as CETA, the earlier the better. And whether that's through initially talking to the bank first and saying, hey, I've heard about CETA, or I heard about the DCED loans. I still like to talk to you about how you can help me, but I'm also interested in exploring those loan programs as well. That would also be beneficial to the bank that you talk to, because if you speak to a banker, especially for startups, and say, I need $500,000 to start my business. Being a startup nature, that may not get as much interest depending on the bank. Some banks are willing to invest in startups, others not so much. But if you go into that meeting to say, hey, I've done some research, I've spoken to someone at, again, DCED or CETA, and I may be eligible for a loan. So I need $500,000 in total, but I can bring in maybe $50,000, $75,000. I only need maybe a couple $100,000 from you, and I can get the rest from, say, the state program or a revolving loan fund. That may get the interest, a little bit more interest from the bank, because they know that they're not going to have to risk a lot of their money into the startup venture.
Great. Thank you for that. I don't see any other questions from our audience at this time, but I do want to remind everyone, thank you for participating in today's webinar. We do have webinars Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday coming up as well, same time, same place, focused on leveraging LinkedIn for your small business, exploring new market opportunities, which focuses on government procurement and contracting, as well as export assistance, and then taking your business to the next level, which will focus on talking about how to use technology to inspire innovation in your small business, and also the challenges faced by specifically tech startups. So I encourage you to take a look at our other webinars. Thank you, John, for a great presentation. And
my pleasure.
This recording will go out later this afternoon, so you'll see that come through in your inbox. All right, and with that, we'll say thanks. Have a good rest of your day.